April 16, 1947. Texas City, Texas. The Gulf air hangs thick with humidity, salt, and the sour tang of refinery exhaust. At 8:12 a.m., smoke rises from the hold of the French cargo ship 𝐅𝐸, tied to Pier O. She carries approximately 1,400 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer stacked in paper sacks, tier upon tier, inside a steel hull already warm from the sun. Longshoremen notice the smoke first, thin, gray, almost lazy. Then it darkens. Then it pulses. The fire glows orange beneath the hatch covers. Heat radiates through riveted plates. Dock workers haul hoses across timber planks, slick with brine and oil. Water arcs into the hold. Steam hisses back out. Few on the pier understand the chemistry unfolding below deck. Ammonium nitrate is stable when cool and open to air. Under heat and confinement, it decomposes, releasing oxygen and feeding its own combustion. When the hatches are sealed to preserve cargo and suppress flame, the hold becomes a chamber. Temperature climbs. Pressure builds against steel, bulkheads never designed for detonation. By 9:12 a.m., the ship shudders. In less than a second, chemical energy converts to shock. The explosion tears the 𝐅𝐸 apart. A pressure wave slams the waterfront at thousands of feet per second. Steel fragments scythe through warehouses and bodies. A 2-ton anchor lifts from the deck and lands nearly 2 miles inland. Windows shatter 40 miles away in Galveston. Refineries ignite. Smoke columns boil upward, black and red. More than 500 people will die. Thousands will carry burns, fractures, and shrapnel for the rest of their lives. Firefighters on the pier vanish where they stand. Fathers loading cargo, clerks stepping outside to look, children pressed against classroom glass. The roar becomes a sudden, crushing silence. This is the story of how 1,400 tons of fertilizer become a weapon, and how a port built on profit pays in blood. In 1947, ammonium nitrate represents promise. It represents bread on tables and record harvests stretching across the Midwest. During the war, the same compound drives explosives and artillery shells. Now it is rebranded as fertilizer, poured into burlap and paper sacks, shipped by rail and sea to replenish exhausted soil. The nation demands grain. Grain demands nitrogen. Nitrogen demands scale. Texas City thrives on that scale. Refineries crack crude oil into feedstocks. Chemical plants draw nitrogen from the air and hydrogen from natural gas, forcing them together inside steel reactors through the Haber-Bosch process. Pressures exceed 3,000 pounds per square inch. Temperatures climb high enough to rattle pipes and shimmer the air above valves. The synthesis runs continuously because shutting down invites instability and costly delays. Restarting requires time, fuel, and money. Production becomes a rhythm. Compressors thrum, gauges vibrate, steam drifts across catwalks. By the mid-1940s, Gulf Coast ports handle millions of tons of chemical cargo each year. Regulatory oversight is fragmented. One agency classifies ammonium nitrate as agricultural material when bagged. Another focuses on maritime navigation. Clear, unified, hazardous material standards do not yet exist. The compound is stable in open air. Under confinement and heat above roughly 400 degrees Fahrenheit, it decomposes rapidly, releasing oxygen and accelerating combustion. That technical reality sits in manuals few dock workers ever read. Men on the piers work 12-hour shifts beneath cranes and cargo nets. Their wages buy homes and school books. And they trust that what they load has been made safe by someone else. Executives speak of growth curves and post-war expansion. The Maritime Commission emphasizes throughput. Efficiency becomes a moral language. If you value careful, evidence-based examinations of industrial disasters and the systems behind them, consider subscribing. These histories matter because they shape the present. Few in Texas City question why thousands of tons of reactive chemical rest beside neighborhoods and classrooms. Prosperity softens scrutiny. Beneath the surface of productivity, the system carries its own ignition source. It looks harmless. White granules in paper sacks, the same material spread across American farmland to coax wheat from tired soil. Ammonium nitrate carries no sharp odor, no oily sheen. In open air, at ordinary temperatures, it rests stable and inert. But chemically, it is an oxidizing salt. It does not burn easily on its own. It feeds whatever does. When heated and confined, it decomposes into expanding gases, steam and nitrogen oxides, releasing oxygen and accelerating combustion with brutal efficiency. Inside the Grand Camp, nearly 1,400 tons of this compound are stacked deep in the hold. The cargo sits in layers, paper packaging pressed tight against steel bulkheads. Ventilation is minimal. There is no active cooling system. When fire begins, perhaps from a stray spark or a smoldering cigarette, the heat settles into the massive sacks like a weight. Smoke thickens, reddish-brown, carrying the metallic tang of nitrogen oxides. The temperature rises beyond what the eye can measure. Crew members introduce steam to smother the blaze and seal the hatches to protect the cargo from water damage. That choice transforms a cargo hold into a sealed chamber. At roughly 500 degrees Fahrenheit, ammonium nitrate's decomposition accelerates sharply. Gas forms faster than it can escape. Pressure builds against riveted steel plates never engineered to withstand internal detonation. The hull vibrates faintly, a low metallic tremor beneath the boots of firefighters above. The scale magnifies the risk. 1 ton of ammonium nitrate under detonation conditions. You can approach a third of the explosive force of TNT. Multiply that by 1,400 tons, and the harbor itself becomes a containment vessel. From the dock, the ship appears intact. Smoke curls into the morning sky. Spectators gather. Firefighters drag hoses across hot deck plating, unaware they stand over a chemical reaction racing toward runaway pressure. Steel feels permanent. Ships feel solid. But chemistry does not negotiate. And there are warnings, small signs, that workers either cannot see or are told to ignore. The smoke is the first clear warning. It does not rise pale and ordinary. It rolls out thick and reddish-brown, staining the morning air above Pier O. Dock workers squint into it, wiping sweat and soot from their eyes. The color comes from nitrogen oxides, gases released when ammonium nitrate begins to decompose under heat. This is not a routine cargo fire. It is a chemical reaction accelerating beneath steel. Yet few on the pier are trained to interpret that signal. Safety documentation exists in manuals and technical bulletins, but in 1947, there is no unified hazardous materials code binding shipper, port, and fire department into a single chain of authority. The Coast Guard regulates navigation. Local firefighters answer alarms. Chemical manufacturers publish guidance that may or may not reach the men on the dock. Responsibility is divided. Accountability is diluted. Firefighters climb aboard the Grand Camp in heavy coats and helmets. Boots strike hot deck plating. Hoses drag across steel, vibrating with pressure. Water streams into the hold, splashing against thousands of paper sacks. Ammonium nitrate dissolves easily, allowing heat to penetrate deeper. Steam is introduced to suppress flames without soaking the cargo. The intention is to save product value. The consequence is confinement. Sealed hatches trap heat and gas, turning a smoldering fire into a pressurized chamber. There are precedents. In 1921, at Oppau, Germany, more than 500 people die when stored ammonium nitrate detonates after shock and heat. The lesson circulates among engineers and chemists. It does not reach the daily rhythm of longshoremen loading fertilizer in Texas. Workers cannot see internal temperature climbing toward critical thresholds. They cannot measure pressure building against rivets. They rely on assurances that this is fertilizer, not explosive. They trust the system that pays their wages. If you have worked around hazardous cargo, what signs would you recognize in that smoke? The column darkens. The crowd along the pier grows denser. Curiosity stands where caution should. And Texas City is not the first to mistake industrial scale for security. The warning has already been written in other cities. It is written in shattered brick and broken glass. 𝐅𝐨𝐥𝐥, Germany, September 21st, 1921. Workers attempt to loosen compacted fertilizer inside a storage silo containing roughly 4,500 tons of ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate. A detonation follows. The blast flattens homes, tears roofs from factories, and kills more than 500 people. Shockwaves travel miles. The crater remains as proof that fertilizer, under confinement and force, becomes an explosive charge. 2 decades later, April 29, 1942, Tessenderlo, Belgium. A fertilizer plant handling ammonium nitrate erupts under heat and pressure. Nearly 200 workers die. Steel frames twist. Concrete walls shear apart. Again, the chemistry is familiar. Oxidation accelerated. Gases expanding faster than containment allows. In the United States, the pattern appears in smaller scale through the 1930s and 1940s. Warehouse fires, nitrate shipments igniting under improper storage. Each incident labeled local error. Each framed as mishandling rather than systemic design. Engineering journals quietly record the compound's sensitivity to contamination, heat, and shock. They recommend segregation of large quantities, improved ventilation, temperature monitoring. These recommendations circulate among specialists, not among longshoremen loading cargo in coastal ports. Economic logic pushes in the opposite direction. Bulk shipping lowers cost per ton. Consolidation increases efficiency. Ports expand storage capacity to handle thousands of tons at once. In Texas City, the high flyer sits nearby with roughly 1,000 additional tons of ammonium nitrate in her hold. 2 ships, 1 harbor. Thousands of workers within a few hundred yards, moving through routine shifts beneath cranes and cables. Warnings travel slowly through bureaucracies. Profit travels faster through ledgers. Industrial culture assumes that lessons learned overseas do not fully apply at home. Technology appears manageable, measurable, contained. Patterns rarely announce themselves as patterns. They exist as scattered reports until a city is leveled. The dock clock moves toward 9:12 a.m. Beyond the pier, families begin their ordinary morning, unaware how close they live to stored energy. The city grows in the shadow of tanks and smokestacks. In 1947, Texas City counts roughly 16,000 residents, most living within a few miles of the docks, where tankers berth and chemical cargo stacks high against steel bulkheads. Refineries hum day and night. Compressors throb. Steam drifts across corrugated rooftops. The air carries a constant trace of sulfur and hot metal. Men rotate through 12-hour shifts, days into nights and back again. Their paychecks cover mortgages, groceries, church offerings. Wives keep ledgers at kitchen tables. Children walk to schools that sit within sight of flare stacks, burning excess gas into the morning sky. The orange glow becomes ordinary. The vibration of distant machinery becomes background noise. Employment is steady. Unions negotiate wages and hours. But comprehensive occupational safety standards do not yet exist. Federal oversight of workplace hazards remains fragmented. Risk settles into daily life. Minor fires, chemical leaks, and small explosions occur often enough to be discussed at supper without panic. They are treated as the price of heavy industry. When smoke rises from the Grand Camp, many residents assume it is another controllable blaze. Industrial fires are familiar. Most are extinguished. Most do not threaten the entire waterfront. At breakfast tables, coffee cups clink against saucers. Teachers chalk arithmetic problems on blackboards as sunlight filters through classroom windows. On the docks, longshoremen continue loading adjacent vessels, boots thudding against timber planks dusted with grain and fertilizer. The port generates millions in annual revenue. It anchors the region's prosperity. Relocating hazardous cargo far from homes and schools would require land, infrastructure, and expense few executives entertain. Economic logic favors proximity and speed. Communities bound to industry inherit its dangers because alternatives are limited. Stability outweighs unease. Above the harbor, the smoke column darkens. Sirens begin to wail, their pitch cutting through the metallic hum. Then the physics changes. In less than 1 second, chemistry becomes shockwave. At 9:12:40 a.m., the Grand Camp ceases to be a ship. A white flash splits the harbor, brighter than welding arc, hotter than any refinery flare. In less than a second, 1,400 tons of ammonium nitrate complete their transformation from stored fertilizer to high explosive. The detonation front races through the cargo at several thousand meters per second. Gas expands violently, converting chemical potential into kinetic force. Pressure spikes into the thousands of pounds per square inch. Steel plates that once held back ocean water fragment outward as shrapnel. The ship disintegrates. Firefighters standing on the deck vanish where they work, their hoses still pressurized, boots still planted on hot steel. The pier beneath them shears away, timber and concrete pulverized into dust. A shockwave radiates across the waterfront, flattening warehouses and ripping doors from hinges. Windows implode across Galveston Bay. Seismographs register the blast as a 2.1 magnitude tremor, as if the earth itself has shifted. A 2-ton anchor lifts from the deck and arcs nearly 2 miles inland before burying itself in soil. Pipelines rupture in nearby refineries, releasing vapor that ignites in secondary fireballs. Storage tanks buckle. A mushrooming column of smoke and debris climbs thousands of feet into the sky, black at its core, rimmed with flame. For workers within 1,000 feet, there is no time to comprehend. Less than a heartbeat separates routine from obliteration. Bodies are torn apart or hurled hundreds of feet by the overpressure. The air itself becomes a weapon. Structures never engineered for blast loads collapse under forces they were not designed to resist. Burning nitrate and steel fragments rain down across the port. Splintered timber and twisted rebar litter streets. Emergency response collapses because the first responders lie among the dead. Sirens that began in warning fall silent beneath the roar. Then comes a brief, unnatural quiet. Dust drifts. Ears ring. Smoke thickens until it blots out the sun. The harbor becomes an inferno. The initial detonation has passed, but the heat remains, and in that heat another ship still burns. The fire does not end with the first blast. It spreads. The high flyer, moored only a short distance from the destroyed pier, carries roughly 1,000 tons of ammonium nitrate along with sulfur in her hold. When the Grand Camp disintegrates, burning debris and steel fragments rain down across the harbor. Flames take hold aboard the second ship. Smoke pours from her decks, darker and heavier as heat builds inside another steel chamber. Tug crews attempt to pull her clear of the dock. Lines snap taut. Winches grind. Mooring cables tangle amid wreckage and twisted bollards. The waterfront is already chaos. Ruptured pipelines vent gas, storage tanks burn, and shattered warehouses block access. Moving the vessel becomes slow, dangerous work conducted under falling embers and thick smoke that stings the eyes and tastes of sulfur and hot metal. Through the night of April 16th into the early hours of April 17th, the fire burns unchecked. Without intact water mains and with fire equipment destroyed in the first detonation, suppression efforts falter. Heat penetrates the cargo. As with the Grand Camp, confinement and rising temperature drive decomposition. Gas pressure builds within sealed compartments. 16 hours after the first explosion, the high flyer detonates. The second blast tears through structures already weakened. Walls that survived the morning collapse outright. Aviation fuel ignites. Petroleum storage tanks rupture, sending sheets of flame across the waterfront. Burning debris travels thousands of feet, scattering across neighborhoods. More than 1,000 buildings in Texas City are damaged or destroyed. Hospitals overflow with the injured. Makeshift morgues fill as identification becomes difficult in the heat and smoke. Infrastructure lies broken. Water mains are ruptured. Fire trucks are wrecked. Communications fail. Containment is no longer possible because the system designed to respond has been shattered. Families miles inland feel the concussion. Windows rattle. The sky glows red through the night. Industrial disasters rarely remain isolated. They cascade. When dawn breaks on April 17th, smoke still rises from twisted steel, and the counting begins. The smoke thins, and the counting begins. Official reports eventually place the death toll above 500. Some estimates climb past 580. More than 5,000 people carry injuries, burns, crushed limbs, shrapnel embedded beneath skin. Entire firefighting crews are erased in the first detonation. Of Texas City's volunteer fire department, most members die on the pier where they stand, hoses still in hand. Recovery crews move through twisted steel and smoldering rubble. The air smells of charred timber, fuel oil, and something metallic that clings to the throat. Many bodies are never fully identified. Some are fragmented beyond recognition, torn apart by overpressure and flying debris. Makeshift morgues fill school gymnasiums and warehouses that still have standing walls. Mass graves are prepared when identification proves impossible. Churches hold continuous services, pews packed with families waiting for names to be read. The dead are longshoremen, refinery operators, sailors, firefighters, office clerks. They are teenage deckhands and aging dock supervisors. They are fathers who leave for morning shift and do not return by noon. In some households, 2 or 3 men vanish in a single blast, leaving mortgages unpaid and futures abruptly severed. Economic losses reach into the hundreds of millions of dollars in 1947 currency, billions by modern measure. Homes are flattened. Small businesses disappear under dust and ash. The port that once symbolized growth and stability now delivers funerals and relief checks. Grief settles into the city like a second layer of smoke. Empty chairs stand at dinner tables. Work boots remain by doors that will not open again. The harbor becomes a memorial of twisted steel and silent water. But grief does not explain how such concentration of hazard is permitted beside a city. Investigations begin and conclusions narrow. The smoke clears and the hearings begin. Federal investigators arrive with notebooks and measuring tapes, stepping over warped rail lines and ash-covered docks. They examine the immediate cause: a fire in the hold, improper storage methods, possible contamination of ammonium nitrate. Reports cite inadequate labeling, insufficient hazard awareness, and failure to recognize the compound's explosive potential under heat and confinement. Technical explanations fill pages: temperature thresholds, decomposition rates, ignition sources. Yet larger questions sit at the edge of the table. Why are thousands of tons of reactive chemicals stored beside homes, schools, and refineries? Why are firefighting protocols designed first to protect cargo value rather than to mandate evacuation? And these questions receive less attention because they implicate systems, not individuals. Responsibility fractures along bureaucratic lines. The French shipping company, American chemical manufacturers, and federal agencies each hold partial authority. Each argues limited control. Lawsuits follow, winding through courts for years. In Delhite versus United States in 1953, the Supreme Court rules that the federal government is largely immune under the discretionary function doctrine. Policy decisions, even when they carry lethal consequences, fall outside certain liabilities. Compensation reaches some families, but it does not match the scale of loss. Structural reform advances slowly, negotiated through committees and industry representatives. And the explosion is framed publicly as tragedy rather than preventable disaster rooted in concentrated risk. Ports across the nation continue shipping ammonium nitrate in bulk. Economic demand does not pause for mourning. The same cost calculations remain in place: efficiency, throughput, minimize delay. Investigations tend to isolate proximate causes: a spark, a threshold temperature, a mislabeled cargo. The broader architecture of industrial concentration survives largely intact. The harbor rebuilds, steel rises where steel fell, but the incentives that shaped Texas City still operate. Production does not pause for grief. In mid-20th century America, output defines strength. Chemical plants expand to meet agricultural demand. Ammonium nitrate moves from reactor to rail car to ship in an unbroken chain designed for speed. Interruptions threaten crop yields, export contracts, and quarterly earnings. Halting shipments means empty fields and financial loss. The calculus favors continuity. Safety improvements require capital. Segregated storage facilities demand land and construction. Temperature monitoring systems and reinforced compartments add costs per ton. Offshore anchoring reduces risk to cities, but increases loading time and fuel expense. Companies measure probability against profit. Rare disasters are weighed against daily revenue. Regulatory authority in 1947 is divided across agencies with overlapping but incomplete jurisdiction. There is no comprehensive occupational safety framework enforcing uniform standards across industries. Oversight is reactive, often triggered only after loss. Standards evolve slowly, negotiated between government and industry while ships continue to load. Workers operate within this structure. A longshoreman who refuses an assignment risks his paycheck. A refinery operator who questions storage practice may be labeled difficult. Communities dependent on industrial wages hesitate to demand reforms that could reduce employment. The smell of chemicals, the vibration of pumps, the low mechanical roar of compressors become familiar companions to daily life. The culture accepts that heavy industry carries casualties. Preventable disasters are mourned, then folded into narrative as unfortunate costs of progress. Memorial services are held. Names are read. Production resumes. If you work in engineering or industrial safety today, how many safeguards exist because someone else paid first? Texas City stands not as anomaly, but as warning, evidence of what happens when efficiency outruns caution. Warnings fade unless they are preserved, and memory is the only barrier against repetition. The fires fade, the rebuilding begins, but the absence remains. In the months and years after the detonation, reforms take shape in measured language. Labels become clearer. Hazard classifications tighten. Storage recommendations evolve to acknowledge that ammonium nitrate, under heat and confinement, can detonate with force comparable to military explosives. Technical bulletins circulate more widely. Some guidelines call for segregation, ventilation, temperature control. These are steps forward, but they are incremental. Bulk shipments of nitrate fertilizer continue across oceans and through crowded ports because agriculture still demands nitrogen and industry still pursues scale. Texas City reconstructs its docks. New steel replaces twisted beams. Refineries restart compressors and flare stacks. The mechanical hum returns, steady and familiar. Economic activity rebounds. Paychecks resume. Yet the dead do not return to the waterfront. Their names move from payroll ledgers to stone memorials. Decades later, other ammonium nitrate explosions erupt in ships, warehouses, and factories on distant continents. Each event confirms the same technical truth. The compound carries a dual identity: In fields, it nourishes crops. Under heat, shock, and confinement, it becomes a detonating mass. Chemistry does not change because policy does. The lesson is not that industry must cease. It is that scale, without disciplined respect for physical law, invites preventable disaster. Systems optimized for throughput must also be engineered for failure with buffers, distance, and safeguards that anticipate human error and economic pressure. In Texas City, engraved names stand as witness. Prosperity and negligence coexist quietly until they collide in fire. 500 lives testify that invisible risk eventually becomes visible flame. If this history sharpens your understanding of industrial power and responsibility, remain with it. Memory is work. Memory resists erasure. The harbor is calm now, water lapping against rebuilt piers, but memory still holds the blast.